And in that opinion, Justice Scalia, in his usual sort of sharp, dismissive way, tore into some of the wrongful conviction literature and elegantly said it's a crock. But I think he's wrong. I think there is a serious problem. You really want to tell me that in a human process as messy as the criminal justice system, with sleeping lawyers, dope-addicted lawyers, drunken lawyers, prosecutors who violate their constitutional rule and hide evidence from the defendants, judges who, let me tell you, I've interviewed and worked with judges for years. Some of them are really nuts. Most of them are great. Most cops are great. Most prosecutors are honest, earnest people. But there are enough flakes out there to say, wow, this is a bad system. It's also very difficult. So there are a lot of really good people who simply make mistakes. Good people make mistakes in any system. There are two hands that I'm ignoring. I guess the other figure I ran by the students this morning is that there are studies estimating between 50,000 to 100,000 unnecessary deaths caused by medical errors in hospitals every year. Think twice before going to the hospital if you don't have to. One of the problems was simply bad handwriting on prescriptions and orders by doctors. Many hospitals now are trying to cut down the error rate that leads to deaths by requiring orders to be typed into a computer or a PDA. Okay. Tom?
I'd like to throw two issues out. Now, let me add.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's, in the area of jury studies, for example, mock juries, there have been thousands of experiments by experimental psychologists. And when they have like a classroom from a psych class, they'll have them look at a film and the situation is the same except the defendant is black in one case, white in the other. And in many of those studies, instead of saying guilty, not guilty, they'll ask for a continuum. I think within an experimental setting, that actually would be a technique that I think would be useful. But there's been virtually, next to nothing done in this area. So we're just at the beginning, and then it would be a good technique in the future. I had a question from a student. Can I take that? And so, sir?
Yes, sir. The question I have is part of the problem that the criminal justice system is currently facing is that there's a lot of politics still involved with police being pressured on. You mentioned murders and rapes. There's a higher wrongful conviction due to the politics involved in such a heinous act. What would you suggest, or what would you like to see take place to circumvent this political problem that we're facing and bring down the level of wrongful convictions?
Well, you've put your finger on some very real issues. To what extent does pressure and politics create problems in wrongful conviction? If we take a look at this list of typical factors, almost all of the studies list mistaken eyewitness identification, false confessions, jailhouse snitches who just lie on somebody else and then the police, mistakes that the police make, and I have in there tunnel vision, et cetera, prosecutorial overzealousness. A lot of this, including problems with errors in laboratories, a lot of this is generated by pressure. Pressure comes in two forms. There's a really big case. There's been a horrendous murder. By the way, John Grisham just published a book last week, which is not a novel, a fiction, but is his account of the Ron Williamson case, one of the better-known cases of wrongful conviction. And in the small Oklahoma city of Ada, a young woman is brutally beaten, raped in her apartment. The place is a mess, and the police are under a lot of heat to resolve the case. And so they're doing a pretty good job of reviewing hundreds of cases, except they make one or two fatal flaws, and then but they feel a real need to solve the case. Samuel Gross, the person who wrote the article that I cite, wrote another article about the death penalty and said something that sounds counterintuitive, but it actually makes a lot of sense. He guessed, that there's a higher rate of error in murder cases than in other kinds of lesser felonies. And you say, wait a minute, murder cases? There's a lot more investigation, a lot more care, there's forensic stuff being done. But cops never let rightfully never let a murder case drop. I mean, years could go by, and there may be a detective who gets a lead, and they'll still get on it. So you've got to resolve the murder case. Why? Because the harm to society, to our moral sense, is so much greater that there's something in us as humans that says we're not going to let this case drop. But that creates the pressure to say, I think that guy did it, and then it creates this tunnel vision where once you're focused on a particular suspect, instead of acting like scientists and saying, let's get all the evidence, whether it's right or wrong, we're going to try to find all the evidence that points to this person's guilt. Now, there may be, you know, a burglary where nobody's scared out of their wits and a minor amount of stuff is taken, and the police get a suspect and they weigh the evidence and they say, the prosecutor is probably going to kick this. Maybe the guy did it, but you know, I'm kind of iffy about the probable cause, and they'll kick the case. They'll say, we're just not going to go forward with this. If this guy's a mope, we'll pick him up later. He's going to do it again. He doesn't seem to be life-threatening. So in reality, there's kind of a lesser standard of how hard the system will push to get a particular individual. So pressure in the big cases, and then the kind of pressure in cases that are maybe not so notorious, not everybody knows about it, to nevertheless resolve those cases. There's a wonderful book that's highly recommended, Homicide: Life on the Killing Streets by David Simon. Have you ever used it? Anybody ever see the series on TV? Homicide? Nobody? Nobody's ever seen that? One person? It doesn't play anymore. I don't know if it's in reruns, but Andre Braugher played one of the cops, and Munch, I guess, who has moved from Baltimore to New York. It's David Simon's book. He's a reporter for one of the Baltimore papers. Spent a year with the homicide division in Baltimore, and recorded what they did. And it is a tremendous book. It's really worth reading. It's very readable, and it tells you a lot about homicide investigation. The police would have on the board the names of their cases, and when they were resolved, they were in black, and when they weren't, they were in red. And looking at that board every day, all the red would drive them nuts, and it would just eat away at them. I've got to solve that case. I've got to solve that case. So there's a lot of pressure. You can call that politics. The other part of the politics has to do with prosecutors. Prosecutors are, for the most part in the U.S., elected officials. I think they tend to have they should have what I call a Ministry of Justice philosophy, where we decide cases by probable cause, by the evidence, and let the chips fall where they may. But it's also an adversary system. People who become cops, people who become defense lawyers and prosecutors, for the most part, are very extroverted people and very competitive people, and they want to win. And when you get into the courtroom setting, that may lead some prosecutors to cut corners, some prosecutors to say, I don't have to be personally convinced that there's probable cause to go forward, let the jury handle it. And that may be generated to some extent by the fact that these are political offices. The chief prosecutor has to be elected, and they always like to tout their 99% success record. So I'm not sure that can ever be gotten out, but I think, especially since we have a highly fragmented criminal justice system. It's not like France, where you have some city police departments and then you have 2 police departments for the whole country. The gendarmerie and the national police, with high standards that apply across the board. Or England, where you have 65 constabularies, they all operate under very similar rules from the Home Office, the same in Japan. Here in the U.S., we have 16,000 municipal police departments, and there's nobody who really tells them what to do. Now, there's been a tremendous increase in training and education in policing. I think prosecutors, have routine classes that they go to. I think there's a general elevation of standards and professionalism that would help to reduce that. But it is a problem in our adversary system. I don't think it's ever going to go completely away. All right, so let me say a few more things. You had another question? Or?